When it comes to SQL Server downtime, it does not negotiate with time zones, but the way European enterprises architect for high availability is shaped by pressure that North American teams simply don't face the same way. Data sovereignty laws, GDPR obligation, and a patchwork of regulatory requirements that make every HA decision a compliance decision too, and which is different from the way you handle it in other regions. SIOS has been helping organizations navigate exactly this complexity for SQL Server environments. And to dig into all of it, we have with us today Aaron West, Solution Engineer at SIOS Technology. Let's start with the regional lens. From what you are seeing on the ground there, you are based in the UK. How do European organizations approach SQL Server high availability differently than their counterparts in, let's say, North America?
Let's highlight, first of all, I think that in North America, what we see is that people are generally working in a quite traditional fashion. So we see an awful lot of Windows LifeKeeper product being sold in North America for SQL Server. That seems to be, like the big line item. Whereas in Europe, I probably have a few more conversations about Linux and running like Microsoft SQL Server on Linux these days. So I think that adaptability in Europe is a bit different. They're a bit quicker to take on the idea of maybe moving over to Linux or things like that. The other thing I think that's quite different is the way that people work in terms of failover and things. People in America tend to sort of do like a big shift sort of failover where, it'll shift everything from like coast to coast or to a central location, whereas in Europe, often due to various reasons, rules and things like that, we'll find people maintaining everything in the same country. So maybe they're using different regions within the country, but they're it's a lot more localized in terms of the way the deployments, the ones I see anyway.
Now, if you look at GDPR and data sovereignty, they are not just compliance checkboxes in Europe. They have real architectural consequences. It's kind of, I used to live in Europe. It's kind of the way of life there. How do those requirements actually shape the way organizations design their SQL Server HA and DR setups?
They generally have to be a little bit aware of where the data's living, right? Because you can't always have the data, leaving the country or, leaving the regulatory region, so to speak. So even with your DR, that would be very tempting, say, to have maybe in a completely different country just to avoid, big events that can happen. You can't necessarily do that when you're taking into account GDPR. I think the other thing is you've also got to be careful that you're not having like old data kicking around on your DR site, because this data is supposed to be deleted within certain times, and people can ask for their data to be removed and things like that. So you don't want to be having old snapshots of people's data that's just sat there on your DR site forever, breaking that GDPR rule.
A lot of enterprises are still kind of running SQL Server on premises, but they feel the pull towards cloud. What does the right path look like for maintaining high availability through that transition without creating new gaps in protection?
No, I think this is where SARS can actually be kind of powerful in the way that it works. So first of all, let me just say that SARS can be installed anywhere. So it can be on your server, it can be in the hyperscaler cloud, it could be at the data center, it can be installed anywhere. We don't mind where it's installed. And we also have as part of the solution, DataKeeper, which is our replicated storage, which is a great solution. It removes a single point of failure that's often found in storage solutions within clusters. One of the cool things is that you can set up a cluster like a hybrid cluster where you've got your initial original server that's on-prem, and then you could deploy a new server that's, say, in the cloud or in another data center, wherever it might be. And then you can use our replication engine to replicate your data up to that other location. Let's say it's the cloud. Then when you're happy to do so, you can fail over very, very quickly in terms of moving up to the cloud, because you kept all your data up to date in the cloud for that day that you actually want to move over to your services. So it can be used as a migration tool. It's not how we sell the product, but I've seen it done. It's quite a clever way of utilizing our product.
Now, if you look at cloud native HA tools, they are easy to pitch on a slide, but what does the total cost of ownership actually looks like when you put them head to head against third-party clustering software or specialized solutions like SIOS?
One thing I've kind of highlight is typically, because in order to get a HA cluster with Microsoft SQL Server, you require the enterprise license to get the availability groups. You might find you're being forced down that road into enterprise versions just to get that HA up in the cloud. Now, I think this is actually one of the biggest areas that we have a real opportunity to affect that total cost of ownership, because SIOS software allows you to stay on standard edition where possible, but still get a 4.9 HA solution. And this is wherever it's located, that allows you to then avoid those hefty enterprise licensing costs. And that can actually offer you up to a 70% cost saving when you're looking at actually, being able to use SIOS with the standard version versus having to do enterprise just to get availability groups. Now, don't get me wrong, if you need enterprise versions for other features other than availability groups, then there's maybe more of a reason for you to go down that path. But I think that what SIOS offers really does solve a problem in that it gives you the ability to do just what I said there. Continue on standard edition, but get a proper HA cluster in place that's robust and not going to fail on you.
If you are a DBA who owns SQL Server availability and you could only get one architectural decision right, what will that be?
Making sure there's no single points of failure. I mean, that's the number one thing that people usually forget, whatever the single point of failure may be. I mean, the most common thing that we see, and one of the things that SIOS obviously solves, so it's in my interest to say it, is the storage side of things. So, I mean, if you were deploying a 2-node SQL cluster with Windows failover clustering, you typically need a SAN. So you'd have two compute nodes, but only one storage node. And if anything goes wrong with that storage node, of course, it doesn't matter that you've got two compute nodes, because you're still back to having to either fix the storage node or you're looking at restoring backups and things like that, which you don't really want to be getting into. So, whether you've got the single point of failure at the storage end or if it's somewhere else within the whole stack, actually examining what you've deployed, making sure there's no one thing that you rely on that if that's gone, then the cluster is going to fail. And if you could remove that single point of failure, I think that you're onto a good thing.
As a gold sponsor at PaaS Summit Europe, what are the conversations that you are most looking forward to having with the DBA and data professional community in Frankfurt?
I mean, it comes back to having that conversation about how we can save people money. I mean, often when we go into a conversation, we're talking just about HA and removing single points of failure and that sort of thing, right? We can't normally go into a conversation and say, hey, we can give you a HA solution, form a cluster, and save you 70% on your licensing fees. So I love going to all the SQL events, PaaS Summit and the others, because it allows me to have that conversation. And once you talk to the right person, that person who's, been forced up to enterprise licensing just to use availability groups, once you talk to that person, you see their eyes light up at the potential they can go back to standard, but still get that level of HA. I think that's a real win.
Aaron, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your perspective on SQL Server high availability in the European context. There was a lot of substance in the conversation. I really appreciate your time today. And for folks, please don't forget to visit SIOS Technology to explore their SQL Server HA and DR solutions. And we will see you in the next one. Thank you.
Thank you.